Guild Wars 2 is a vast and amazing game that offers tons of hours of unique and interesting gameplay, but the very first step into this wonderful world is by picking the class you wish to play. Guild Wars 2 offers 9 fantastic classes that can fit a number of different roles and play styles to experience the world of Tyria. But which one is for you? And that is where I'm going to help you out. This is a compilation of all 9 new player guides for every class in the game. In these guides, I will cover the specific profession mechanics, trait lines, weapons, including the newly featured weapon proficiencies, utility skills, general playstyles, some leveling tips, gear selection, and a brief cover of each of their elite specializations. I've included timestamps down below so that you can pick the class that you want to learn more about. Let's get into it. So you're just trying out Guild Wars 2 and you see the warrior, tried and true and ever fast standing staple of the MMORPG genre. Also known as a fighter or a barbarian or even a berserker. You are ready to start wailing away with furious anger, but you have no idea where to start. Well, that's where I'm going to help you out. This is the new player's guide to the warrior in Guild Wars 2. While this guide will be a focus on the core spec, I will briefly cover the berserker, the spellbreaker, and the bladesworn. Let's get into it. First, getting started with the class, the warrior's profession mechanic is their adrenaline bar. While in combat, warriors gain adrenaline. This bar fills up with frothing rage until they use a burst attack, which is a much more powerful strike that correlates with whatever weapon the warrior is using at the time. These burst skills go on a short cooldown until the warrior has earned enough adrenaline to utilize it again. These burst skills can be utilized as long as there is a single adrenaline bar filled. The effectiveness, however, of the strike depends on the amount of adrenaline used, up to a cap of 3. Warriors can also swap weapons with full adrenaline to instantly use a burst skill with a new weapon set. So let's go ahead and take a look at the trait lines. The warrior has access to everything a regimented combatant would need to capitalize its combat. They gain access to strength, arms, defense, tactics, and discipline. Strength emphasizes dodging and brute force. This trait line can also improve physical skills as well as use of the greatsword. The arms trait line improves critical hits and condition damage primarily, but can also improve the sweet dual-wielding melee warrior. Defense obviously emphasizes mitigating damage while offering ways to counter and stun enemies. Tactics is unique as it primarily focuses on supporting allies with might generation as well as being able to heal using their shout skills. Discipline focuses on weapon swapping as well as giving some improvements to adrenaline generation for more burst skills. Warriors can be quite versatile depending on the role they are trying to fill. The warrior quite literally has access to the most amount of weapons in-game, with only a few weapons outside of their reach currently. The warrior can use with 2 hands the greatsword, the hammer, the longbow, and the rifle. Main hand they can use the axe, the mace, and the sword. Offhand, they can use an axe, a mace, a shield, a warhorn, and a sword. With the weapon master training or their respective elite specializations, the warrior can utilize a dagger in both main and offhand torch, as well as offhand pistol. The greatsword is the most iconic for the warrior, offering incredible strike damage and fantastic mobility. The burst skill is Arcing Slice, that spins an attack around you, dealing incredible damage to low HP enemies. This ability also grants Fury, which increases your critical strike chance. The hammer brings the boom with strong area of effect while also strong crowd control. The burst skill is Earthshaker, which jumps to an area dealing damage and stunning all enemies caught in the epicenter. The longbow is a condition damage oriented weapon, being able to hit from incredible distance and lighting targets ablaze with burning damage. The burst skill is Combustive Shot, which ignites an area with intensive burning damage. The rifle is a single target weapon that strikes with high power damage. The burst skill is Kill Shot, which is a slow windup for massive damage onto a single target. The main hand axe attacks swiftly and builds adrenaline even faster. Its burst skill is Eviscerate, that leaps to an enemy and deals more damage based off of the amount of adrenaline spent. It also grants might when it connects. The mace tends to be a more defensive-oriented weapon that can block and daze enemies. The burst skill is Skullcrack, that stuns a single enemy for a duration depending on the amount of adrenaline used. The sword is a condition damage style weapon that offers great mobility and even more bleeding. The burst skill is Flurry, which roots the warrior in place, immobilizes the enemies, and then stacks intensive bleeding with every strike. The main hand dagger slows and disables enemies with fast attacks. The Dagger Burst skill is Breaching Strike, which deals damage and removes boons from the target. It deals significantly more damage if your target doesn't have any boons. The Offhand Axe brutally strikes with both weapons or spins rapidly for devastating effect. The Offhand Mace inflicts vulnerability while also being able to knock enemies down. The Shield offers some crowd control as well as an incredibly strong block, whereas the Offhand Sword can block attacks as well or inflict strong condition damage. The Warhorn is a support weapon that provides great boons and barriers to nearby allies, while the Torch emphasizes burning and condition damage. The Offhand Dagger strikes and removes boons. It can also reflect some projectiles coming in through the front while also granting a barrier. And lastly, the pistol attacks with Brutal Force, being able to deal strong strike damage as well as resetting one of their abilities. At the time of recording this video, the Warrior is set to get a new weapon capability in the Staff, which truly gives the Warrior the most versatile weapon kit at their disposal. The Warriors have unique utility skills that complement their diverse weapon set. Warriors have access to banners, physical skills, shouts, signets, and stance skills. The banner skills produce a literal banner at the location that pulses benefits to nearby allies or pulses negative effects to enemies. Physical skills tend to be oriented around crowd control, but are incredibly unique on their own. Shout skills tend to be support focused, providing boons to allies or some negative effects to enemies. Signet skills provide strong passive and powerful active effects, while stance skills provide positive effects that last for a short duration. Each of these utility skills provide excellent benefit for their build setups and allow the Warrior to be a strong player really in any form of endgame content. The Warrior tends to be an upfront and melee powerhouse. Given the amount of melee weapons they have access to, it makes sense. With their great vitality pool, they can handle close quarter combats for quite a while. They do have some condition damage options, however, they tend to be outshined by their strike damage choices. Typically, most builds tend to offer quite a bit of might generation, which increases all outgoing damage for a time, and also given some of their defensive abilities, they can offer some great sustain and strong durability, making them an excellent choice for new players. Here are some leveling tips to get you started with your Warrior. First, the Warrior is versatile with all the weapons they have access to, so pairing two weapons together that have synergy can work incredibly well. For example, using the Greatsword Burst ability grants Fury, then switching to the Dual Axes, use the Dual Strike for the Quickness boon, and then Whirling Axe, the Offhand Axe 5 ability, to stack up some incredible damage very, very quickly. Speaking of your burst abilities, the Warrior can cap out with Adrenaline and also still have their burst ability on cooldown, so don't be afraid to swap weapons and use the offset weapon skills burst ability. Take this with a grain of salt, however, there may be some times that you are waiting for an enemy's vulnerability or you need to land crucial crowd control, so assess each situation to your advantage. Lastly, the Warrior's Signet skills can provide a simple choice for the leveling Warrior, as passive effects make you more effective in combat while also not being punished for the timing of their use. This is just my opinion, however. The Warrior, being oriented around mostly strike damage, can greatly benefit from Berserkers or even Assassin's gear set. Given their high base defensive stats, they can be much more aggressive compared to other professions. If playing with more condition damage in mind, i.e. the swords or the longbow, they may look to take either Grieving or Vipers. However, despite the amount of condition damage oriented around there with their skills, they still also do quite a bit of strike damage. So let's go ahead and take a look at the elite specializations. First, we have the Berserker, the elite specialization for the Warrior from the Heart of Thorns expansion. This new elite spec is an offensive powerhouse, gaining access to the Berserk mode, an additional mechanic next to their burst skills. This new skill offers them a Berserk mode which allows them to use primal bursts, which amplify their burst skills greatly, while also allowing them to build adrenaline to use primal burst skills again in rapid succession. Once the Berserk mode times out, they will have to wait a time before they can reactivate it again. In that time, they still have access to their normal burst skills. The Berserker also gains access to Rage skills, unique to the Berserker. Each of these skills have their own specific primary effects, however, they also can extend the duration of Berserk mode when used during said Berserk mode. This is dependent on each skill, some requiring enemies to be either nearby, and some abilities requiring you to connect with an enemy to extend that Berserk. The Berserker also gains access to the Torch, or if you have the Weapon Master training. The torch again inflicts a number of harmful conditions on enemies while also being able to crowd control and even cleanse the Berserker. Without a doubt, the Berserker definitely brings the heat. Now we have the Spellbreaker from the Path of Fire expansion. The Spellbreaker has a massive emphasis on balance and boon stripping of enemies, sacrificing some of their adrenaline bars to gain access to Full Counter, an additional profession mechanic. The Full Counter ability absorbs the next attack, then counterattacks all nearby foes, damaging them and interrupting their abilities. The Spellbreaker also gains access to meditation skills, which can remove boons, taunt foes, and even create a massive area that blocks projectiles from entering, while also still removing more boons. As mentioned earlier, the Spellbreaker gains access to dual daggers, which can daze, remove more boons, and even reflect forward-facing projectiles. The daggers also attack very fast, with the main skill chain having increased effects with critical hits. The Spellbreaker tends to be a very strong pick for keeping the fight fair and on equal playing fields. And lastly, we have the Bladesworn, the End of Dragon's elite specialization. The Bladesworn foregoes their ability to swap weapons in place of their Gunsaber profession mechanic, and removing adrenaline bars for flow. The Gunsaber is an alternative weapon set that combines sword and bullets for dire effect. The Bladesworn also gains access to Dragon Trigger, a unique and powerful state that charges up a Dragon Slash, which is a single attack that can annihilate many enemies from a single blow. This state consumes flow to gain charging, or until the Bladesworn runs out of flow, or the Bladesworn activates one of the 3 Dragon Slashes. The Dragon Slashes deal more damage based off of the amount of charges it consumes. Dragon Slash Force is an immediate attack around the area of the Bladesworn, and it deals the most damage. Dragon Slash Boost moves the Bladesworn in a line, slashing all enemies that come in contact with the Bladesworn. And lastly, Dragon Slash Reach sends out a blade of air forward in a line as a projectile, dealing damage to enemies in a straight line. Flow is gained at a constant interval while in combat, and any skills or traits that gain adrenaline will instead now gain flow at a faster rate. The Gunsaber is a unique tool, as it tends to offer a variety of skills that can either deal damage or offer some sweet mobility. However, the Artillery Slash can consume some of the charges you build up when you were in combat. The Gunsaber can also be swapped in and out with a normal warrior weapon set, meaning that you can still come back to your greatsword and then jump back into the Gunsaber. The Bladesworn also gains access to armament skills, which are oriented around the profession mechanic in the Dragon Trigger. These skills tend to interact either with the flow rate, ammunition charges, and can even reduce the recharge of your next Dragon Trigger ability. Bladesworn gains access to the Pistol Offhand, which works in kind of conjunction with these abilities, by dealing damage and then being able to recharge the Dragon's Roar ability, which pushes you back slightly based off of the amount of ammunition spent. Bladesworn has one of the most unique profession mechanics in the game. It adds an incredibly fun playstyle to the Warrior. The Warrior is without a doubt one of the biggest staples in any MMORPG, and here in Guild Wars 2, they are an absolute monster that brings fast and furious gameplay with just the right amount of anger. So you decided to take a look at the most righteous character you can find in Guild Wars 2, and you stumble onto the Guardian, the resident golden child. But you have no idea where to start. Well, that's where I'm going to help you out. This is the new player's guide to the Guardian in Guild Wars 2. While the emphasis will focus on the core spec, I will briefly touch on the Dragon Hunter, the Firebrand, and the Willbender. Let's get into it. The Guardian's profession mechanic are their virtues. Each one of these virtues embody one of the ideals of any stalwart protector: justice, resolve, and courage, or as it's supposed to be sound, justice, courage, and resolve. Each one of these offer unique combat effects. Justice burns enemies passively with every few attacks, while the active ability imbues the Guardian and their allies to burn them with the guaranteed next attack. Resolve heals passively, but when activated can heal for a large chunk on demand. Courage passively applies a boon called Aegis, which blocks the next attack. When it is activated, it grants Aegis to the Guardian and their nearby allies. Each one of these virtues can be further modified with specific trade lines and choices, but passively on their own they make the Guardian an incredibly durable combatant. Speaking of trade lines, the Guardian has a wide variety of customization skills based off of the playstyle that the Guardian is looking to accomplish. The Guardian has access to Zeal, Radiance, Honor, Valor, and Virtues. Zeal focuses on improving strike damage as well as applying vulnerability, which causes targets to take more damage per stack. Radiance is oriented around the Justice virtue, providing burning, improving critical strikes, and improving resolution uptime. Resolution reduces all incoming condition damage while active. Honor is oriented around the Resolve virtue that focuses on healing, dodging, and protection. This can also improve your shouts. Valor is oriented around the Courage virtue, improving damage mitigation through blocking and Aegis. The Virtues trait line improves various components of all three virtues while also providing extra sources of resolution. Inherently, the Guardian can provide some great healing and defensive ability, while also still being quite an offensive powerhouse. The Guardian has a versatile set of weapons that they can utilize to combat the forces of evil and the wicked. Uniquely, each one of the main hand or any of the two-handed weapons has a symbol, and each symbol provides a unique benefit to allies or a damaging effect to enemies. Let's review. First, the Greatsword offers powerful AoE attacks, healing, and mobility. It also provides an excellent source of crowd control in the form of a pool. The Hammer is more defensive oriented, providing excellent crowd control, moderate damage, and grants protection, which reduces all incoming damage by 33%. The Staff is a supportive style of weapon, offering excellent healing and even swiftness, which improves movement speed by 33%. The main hand weapon Mace is a defensive and supportive weapon, striking slow but applying regeneration and even some crowd control. The Sword is an offensive powerhouse, providing a shadow step, incredibly strong attacks, and even providing fury, which improves critical strike chances when active. The Scepter is a mid-range offensive weapon that can immobilize and smite enemies at that distance. The Offhand Focus focuses light to deal damage, but can also apply Aegis to block incoming attacks. The Shield can activate a wave of light to apply Aegis to allies, or create a protective moving dome that deflects all incoming ranged attacks. The Torch burns all nearby enemies by setting the Guardian literally on fire, or it can blow fire in a cone in front of them, cleansing conditions and damaging enemies. The Elite Specialization weapons are now made available across the board if you have the Weapon Master training from the Secrets of the Obscure expansion, or if you own the individual expansion and their corresponding elite specializations. The longbow strikes enemies with true arrows at long distance, being able to control and burn them. The main hand axe burns and bleeds enemies while also pulling them closer into the jaws of the axe. The offhand sword offers swift, mobile strikes that deal incredibly high damage. The Guardian will be able to utilize dual pistols, which deal condition damage at a medium range. The Guardian has some great utility skills that are typically balanced to offer both positive effects for allies and the Guardian, as well as damaging effects for their enemies. They can utilize consecrations, meditations, shouts, signets, and spirit weapons. Consecrations are a strong area of effects that can be put onto the ground and offer a variety of defensive and supportive capabilities. Meditations provide cleansing, mobility, and healing in a variety of ways. Shouts provide positive effects to the Guardian and their nearby allies, and can even draw all conditions from them and place them onto the Guardian. Signet skills provide strong passive and powerful active abilities. These tend to be more defensive in focus. Uniquely to the Guardian, spirit weapons summon effigies of massive weapons to deal damage, control, and even heal. Possibly some of the most visually appealing skills in the game. The playstyle of the Guardian can fit many different roles in various forms of content. In the open world, they typically are not as durable as, say, the Warrior with their toughness or vitality, but they make up for it with their various forms of Aegis and passive healing. Even some of their skills can heal on demand, so despite the lower defensive stats, they are more than capable of handling quite a bit of endgame. Speaking of endgame, in grouped content, Guardians are unmatched due to their supportive passive capabilities. Baseline and even offensively, they can't help but make a positive impact on their nearby allies. The Guardian also being mostly melee, the Aegis boon generation, and the bounce damage mitigation will make you an absolute beast. Here's some quick leveling tips to get you started with your Guardian. Number 1, remember that your main defenses are being able to block often. Watching your enemy's attacks and knowing when to take the hit, to use Aegis, or even dodge roll will vastly improve your survivability. Don't forget symbols provide powerful boons while you stand in them. Always try to make sure that you are keeping those up as long as possible. 3. Mostly, the Guardian can be self-sufficient, but absolutely thrives in group settings or with other players. Don't forget to make some friends. So regardless of what type of build you are looking for, the Guardian is an excellent hybrid class, providing healing, strike damage, condition damage, as well as crazy supportive boons. Honestly, the Celestial stat line is always a solid choice just for a simple, straightforward focus on handling Tyria. More offensively oriented, say for strike damage, personally I like the Grieving stat line or even the simple Berserkers, while Condition Vipers is always a great choice. For supportive capabilities, anything that applies healing and concentration is going to be your best friend. Harrier is honestly always a good go-to, but being versatile and honestly hybrid focused, you can't really go wrong. Now let's take a look at the elite specializations. The Dragon Hunter is the Heart of Thorns elite specialization for the Guardian and takes hunting very seriously. Originally released with their featured weapon, the longbow, they ensnare enemies and pull them into vicious traps to obliterate them. Their profession mechanic changes the way that they function to be more range-oriented, going with Spear of Justice, Wings of Resolve, and Shield of Courage. Spear of Justice tethers the Guardian to an enemy and, when reactivated, pulls the target to the Dragon Hunter. Wings of Resolve provide a short-range leap that allows you to heal when you land. The Shield of Courage creates a projectile blocking barrier in front of the Guardian that moves with them. Their new skills are traps, which deal immense damage to those who cross those thresholds. Specifically, even their elite trap skill, Dragon's Maw, prevents escape once the enemy has fallen victim. The Dragon Hunter is a vicious and cunning combatant. The Firebrand is essentially a spiritual prophet that is tied to the Path of Fire expansion. The Firebrand is an excellent, multi-focused specialization, by offering not only incredible condition damage, but some of the best supportive capabilities in the game. The Firebrand originally was released with the Axe to burn and bleed enemies while also being able to control them. The Virtues turn into Tomes, which are new weapon sets that function on a charge system. These charged are used each time that the Firebrand utilizes a skill within any of the Tomes. When used, they go on a short cooldown before they can be accessed again. The Tome of Justice offers crowd control and immense burning. Tome of Resolve offers fantastic healing and condition cleansing while also providing some great boons. The Tome of Courage provides amazing defensive boons and affects such as stability, protection, and even being able to taunt enemies to attack the Firebrand. Their new skills are mantras, which take a few seconds to charge, but then can use them in quick succession with growing effect for each cast. The Firebrand is one of the most notable sources of a boon called Quickness, which improves casting speed greatly, and is one of the main requirements in any types of group content. Feel the heat from the Burn Master. Lastly, we have the Willbender, the elite specialization from the End of Dragons expansion. The Willbender is a fast and mobile combatant that looks to deal immense melee damage with kicks and forceful punches to overwhelm enemies quickly. Originally released with the offhand sword, the Willbender is a ferocious fighter. The Virtues become mobility-based, each offering a short-range dash depending on which one is utilized. Rushing Justice dashes towards an enemy, burning them and applying Willbender Flames. This damages enemies over time. Flowing Resolve evades attacks and cleanses conditions while moving forward and also applies Willbender Flames. Crashing Courage is a short-range shadow step that applies stability and Aegis. The new skills are physical skills, which provide extra mobility, strikes, and powerful, hard-hitting crowd control abilities. Paired with the Guardian's baseline defensive capabilities, a fast and deadly assassin across any battlefield. Regardless of the focus, the Guardian is an exceedingly versatile class, and not only has a spot in every form of endgame content, they also have some of the best aesthetics across the board. Without a doubt, the Guardian is the true defender of Tyria. So, you decided to purchase an expansion for Guild Wars 2, and now you have access to the Mistwalker in the Revenant, but you are incredibly lost. There are new energy bars, teleports, what's a legend? It's a bit overwhelming. Well, that's where I'm hoping to help you. This is the new player's guide to the Revenant in Guild Wars 2. While the emphasis is going to be on the core spec, I will briefly touch on the Herald, the Renegade, and the Vindicator. Let's get into it. First, let's go ahead and talk about the profession mechanic for the Revenant, which is their legends. This also plays into their skills, but I will cover that in a minute. The Revenant uses an energy bar to fuel their skills and weapon abilities. This regenerates quickly as skills are used. Some skills, however, have upkeep costs that either slow the energy gain or slowly degenerate it. When you swap legends, the Revenant gains energy ready to use new skills with the new channeled hero. To play the Revenant effectively, energy management is critical, as mismanagement will leave you starved for energy and defenseless. Pairing with the energy, the other unique aspect of their gameplay are these, in fact, legends. The Revenant has access to 4 legends that they can mix and match, only ever having 2 of them active at any given time. The Assassin stance, the Dwarf stance, the Centaur stance, and the Demon stance. Each of these stances have unique skills tied to them, meaning that the Revenant cannot pick and choose individual skills to flesh out their build. They are locked in with whatever specific legend that they choose, and every legend always has the same skill. The Revenant also gains access to a unique skill called Ancient Echo, which, given the stance that you are currently in, provide a unique benefit while also regaining some of your energy. For the Assassin stance, your next 2 attacks are unblockable. For the Centaur stance, you gain regeneration. For the Dwarf stance, you gain Right of the Great Dwarf, which reduces incoming damage by 50%. And lastly, the Demon stance, which grants you resistance for a time. Given that, each of these legends have a unique playstyle and certain combat advantages. The Assassin stance has an emphasis on fast melee combat, shadow stepping, and even some great crowd control. Counter to that, the Dwarf stance embodies stoicism, offering fantastic defenses and durability. The Demon stance focuses more on malice and dealing condition damage, while being able to pulse negative effects to nearby foes. Lastly, the Centaur stance focuses heavily on healing and supporting, and even a bit of crowd control. Given the rigid constraints of your legend, mastering the skill usage should be a bit easier than if you could customize your build. Also, please note that the Revenant does not have access to any other racial skills like the other professions may have. The trait lines of the Revenant focus on improving various legendary stances, as well as improving the legend swap in general. The 5 lines are Corruption, associated with the Demon stance, Retribution, associated with the Dwarf stance, Salvation, which improves the Centaur stance, Devastation, which is focused around the Assassin stance, and of course Invocation, which just improves legend swapping in general. Corruption improves the amount of torment applied, as well as the intensity of each application. Torment is a damage over time condition that deals more damage to stationary targets. Corruption can also grant you resistance, and even heal you whilst using the Demon stance. Resistance makes you immune to any form of crowd control. Retribution reduces damage taken while also improving vigor generation. Vigor recovers endurance faster, and endurance is spent on dodge rolling, allowing you to evade attacks for a short time. The Retribution line also grants resolution from a number of choices. Resolution reduces the incoming condition damage that you take by a flat 33%. Salvation improves your healing and cleansing capabilities, whilst also giving you lots of supportive boons. Devastation focuses around improving on-hit damage and applying vulnerability stacks on enemies at incredible speeds. Vulnerability increases the damage taken from all sources. Lastly, the Invocation trait line improves the capabilities of legend swapping, offering extra benefits, switching back and forth, while also granting Fury, and of course Fury improves the critical strike chance while the boon is active. Regardless of the route that you go, the Revenant is a force to be reckoned with. The weapons that the Revenant is able to utilize vary in a number of ways, as they are the Mist Champions. They use these weapons by phasing in and out of sight and reappearing to devastate foes with brutal force. The Revenant has access to weapon swapping while in combat. The Revenant can use the hammer, the staff. In one hand, they can use the mace, the sword, and in their offhand, they can either use the axe or the sword. The hammer is arguably the most unique weapon. Comparably, it is coming close to the Mesmer and their greatsword. But the hammer is a ranged mist weapon that deals high damage at long range and can stun multiple groups of enemies at the same time, whilst also blocking projectiles from enemies. The staff is more used for close-ranged healing and supportive, offering blocking and some crowd control. The main hand mace is a medium or close-range weapon that inflicts a number of conditions, while the main hand sword offers high mobility as well as high strike damage. The offhand axe applies conditions, whilst also crippling enemies. And of course, the offhand sword deals incredibly high strike damage while also being able to immobilize enemies. The Revenant will be able to utilize the Scepter, which will offer a melee support option granting might and barrier. The Revenant is a fast and fierce combatant, and not one to be taken lightly. The playstyle of the Revenant is a fast-moving and furious mist attacker that obliterates enemies in a blink of an eye. Because of the 2 legend skill sets, the Revenant, in a sense, has access to 6 utility skills, 2 heal skills, and 2 elite skills. Most of what makes the Revenant unique is utilizing the skills in their furious combat to overwhelm enemies and crush them with mist force. Each of the skill sets usually comes with some form of crowd control, either a stun break or perhaps even both, allowing the Revenant to be an incredibly versatile combatant. The skills can be utilized immediately upon entering that specific legend, so fast hands, given the situation, could mean the difference between getting the kill and going into downstate. Remembering each of the skill sets in each of the legend stances plays key, as you can also swap weapons with the Revenant, meaning you have 2 sets of weapon skills as well as 2 sets of utility skills. Generally, the quick strikes or devastating conditions are more than enemies can handle, but remember most of these skills are tied to that energy cost, meaning that spamming all of your abilities is not always the best for you. Be patient. Utilize skills as you need for great success. So when leveling your Revenant, you have to understand that energy management is king when it comes to playing it effectively. As I've mentioned a number of times, this is probably the key, most important aspect that you can learn when picking up the Revenant. Second, do not linger forever in a single legend. Because you receive more benefits by swapping to another legend, it actually affects you more to stay stagnant. Lastly, when it comes to legend choices, I personally like the assassin stance with swords as my first go-to, as Shiro does pack a punch. Gear choice for the Revenant should reflect whatever you're trying to accomplish. Using a more power-oriented build around the assassin or the dwarf stance, you may want to run berserkers or marauders as a go-to. If you are aiming for a condition route, you can of course go with the Vipers for pure DPS, paired with the Demon and the Dwarf stance. If you need some survivability, Carrion can be a great choice. Celestial, of course, is not a bad go-to for beginners in any sense, because it removes all the testing out of the equation and gives you a, we'll say, open world and takes some of the guesswork out of min-maxing. Now let's go ahead and talk about the elite specializations. The Heart of Thorns expansion features the Herald, the Dragon Knight. The Herald gains a new legend in Glint, the legendary dragon stance. The main emphasis of the Herald is their facets. These capitalize the effects of energy management by allowing each of the dragon stance skills to drain energy while they are toggled. If the Herald activates the ability again, it triggers a stronger effect, removing the energy drain and putting that skill on cooldown. Because of the nature of this effect, the Dragon Knight must keep some skills draining whilst using others for their effects. Most of these facets pulse boons for the Herald, but typically their active effects affect foes in devastating ways. The trait line of the Herald improves a number of ally benefit choices, but can do well in solo settings. The Herald also picks up the shield, which is used in a defensive manner. I mean, the legendary dragon stood in defense of all the races of Tyria. I mean, it makes sense. While capable of supporting, the Herald does amazingly as a strong DPS. This is one of the specs that I would choose if you wanted to become the dragon. The Renegade is the Path of Fire elite specialization for the Revenant and features the vicious outlaw Kalia Scorchrazor. This legend from the past summons her warband from the mists to devastate and shred enemies of the Renegade. The Renegade also has a special ability that can benefit allies and even summon devastating arrows from the mists. Speaking of arrows, the Renegade picks up a shortbow, which inflicts a number of conditions and control upon enemies. An extra effect for the Renegade, when critically hitting foes and striking them from their flanks, gains the Renegade Kalia's favor, which grants him a number of benefits such as improved strike damage, as well as improving condition damage, and offering some lifesteal. While a strong DPS, the trait line and various abilities make the Renegade a fantastic supportive character, being able to provide some amazing buffs, specifically Alacrity, which reduces the cooldown of all active abilities while that boon is on. In the meantime, while supporting that boon, The Renegade can melt enemies with their various conditions. The Renegade is always accepted in any team. Lastly, the Vindicator is the End of Dragon's elite specialization for the Revenant. It is unique because it channels the legendary alliance between the Kurzik and Luxan leaders who joined forces to take down Shiro the Betrayer. The legend actually offers two separate skill sets. Whereas the Luxan focuses on damage and the personal effect, the Kurzik focuses on healing and group support. The Vindicator's dodge roll also becomes a massive leap, sending the Vindicator high into the air briefly before rocketing down, dealing damage to enemies and healing allies if picked into it. The Vindicator also picks up the Great Sword to rip apart enemies with devastating force mists and brutal swings, while the trait lines can be chosen in a number of different ways to fit the different roles. What's that up in the sky? It's a bird, it's a plane, it's a meteor, it's the Vindicator? The Revenant is without a doubt one of the most unique classes in Guild Wars 2, and even more so in any MMO anywhere. So you are out there communing with the wilds, and you come across a player attacking in unison with their giant fluffy cat named Butterscotch, and you say, well, why not me? So you take a look at the Ranger, and you are a bit, well, lost. Well, that's where I'm going to help you out. This is the new player's guide to the Ranger in Guild Wars 2. While this guide will focus on the core spec, I will also briefly cover the Druid, the Soul Beast, and the Untamed elite specializations. Let's get into it. First, let's go ahead and take a look at the profession mechanic, and that is, of course, their pets. Each ranger has a whole host of pets that they can utilize while in combat. All throughout Tyria, there are these juvenile pets that can be tamed for the ranger's usage. While the ranger can tame many different pets, they can only have one active pet and one stowed pet. The ranger can only swap between two different pets in combat at a time, and when they change their pet loadout, the pets that they had previously are stowed for future use. Where? I don't know, somewhere in this panel. Each pet has baseline abilities that they use automatically and one on-demand skill that can be used at that particular moment's command. The pet can also be adjusted to be more of an aggressive stance, attacking nearby enemies, or a passive stance, only attacking when commanded. When a pet is defeated in combat, they enter a down state, making the pet invulnerable and losing all aggro, boons, and conditions. However, they cannot be healed in any way while in combat, aside from swapping pets. When a down pet is swapped, the cooldown to summon them back into combat is significantly longer. If the ranger leaves combat with their down pet, the pet will start regenerating HP rapidly. The trait lines of the ranger reflect their proficiency to wield nature and the wilds while in combat. They have access to marksmanship, skirmishing, wilderness survival, nature magic, and beast mastery. Marksmanship emphasizes starting a fight with an advantage, improving longbow skills. Skirmishing focuses on critical strikes as well as condition damage and weapon swapping. Wilderness survival improves defenses by removing conditions and increasing protection uptime. Protection reduces all incoming strike damage for its duration. This trait line also may benefit survival skills. Nature magic improves healing and regeneration, while beast mastery improves your profession mechanic in your pets. This line also improves the greatsword as well. Each one of these trait lines offers a unique way to play as the ranger, making them quite the formidable opponent. The ranger can field a number of different weapons in combat, nearly matching that of the warrior in its combat capabilities. They can utilize a greatsword, a longbow, a shortbow, and with a weapon master training, the ranger can also use the staff and or the hammer. These are also unlocked if you own the expansions for their respective elite specializations. For main hand weapons, the ranger can use an axe and a sword, and of course with the weapon master training or the Path of Fire expansion, a dagger main hand. Offhand, the ranger can use an axe, dagger, torch, and warhorn. The greatsword is a high mobility and heavy burst weapon, allowing for devastating close quarters combat as well as offering some defenses and blocking and evasion. The longbow assails enemies at an incredible distance and can easily decimate groups of enemies with large area of effect barrages. The shortbow is a short-ranged, fast weapon that inflicts heavy conditions while also being incredibly agile. The staff is support-focused, with long-range attacks allowing you to root enemies as well as healing some allies. The hammer is a powerful melee weapon capable of controlling enemies with its heavy smashes. The main hand axe is a medium-ranged throwing weapon that bounces between enemies while also generating might. The sword provides heavy evasion and mobility to the ranger, along with incredibly strong strike damage. The main hand dagger is a fast attacking weapon that can decimate a target with some heavy conditions. The offhand axe can pull enemies close and then spin rapidly, damaging all nearby enemies. The offhand dagger can cripple enemies at a distance or evade attacks while inflicting poison. The torch inflicts heavy burning as well as creating fire fields. And lastly, the warhorn can deal damage to enemies over time while also providing benefits to allies. The ranger will receive dual maces to support allies while laying the beat down on enemies. Regardless of the approach, the ranger can be as versatile as need be. The ranger has access to some extremely unique utility skills to enhance their combat capabilities. The ranger can use survival, spirits, traps, commands, and signet skills. Survival skills are defensively oriented and assist in getting the ranger out of danger. Spirits are temporary effigies that can provide boons to allies or negative effects to enemies before disappearing. Traps are marked areas on the ground that trigger negative effects when enemies cross their thresholds. Commands are skills oriented around your pet, allowing them to improve not only their combat capabilities, but being able to assist allies or increase outgoing damage. Lastly, signet skills provide strong passive and powerful active effects when activated. The ranger truly has everything it needs to handle the wilds. The playstyle of the ranger can be molded into many different forms to fit what they have in front of them. Tag teaming with their pet, they can provide not only support to allies, but heavy damaging combination attacks. Primarily, the pet can be used as a tank to distract enemies while the ranger assails at range before rushing into melee to finish off the kill. Given the amount of traps and spirits that they have access to, they can control a number of enemies, even when viciously outnumbered. The ranger, of course, has access to multiple different pets that each have a unique skill to utilize, which can instantly improve their combat capabilities in open world. And such skills include some crowd control, heavy condition damage, chilling, or even weakness. Given the arsenal of the weapons that the ranger can field, they also have plenty of great options for custom builds to how they want to play. Either with a ranged focus or with melee combat, striker condition, they have access to one of the most versatile toolsets in the game. Here are some quick leveling tips to get you started with the ranger. Learning pet control can drastically improve your experience as you will be able to manage who or what you are attacking. The commands seen here allow you to decide when and where your pet attacks, so pick these up quickly. Number 2, the Beast Mastery trait line is a great place to start when it comes to leveling, as this gives your pet a hefty stat boost, allowing them to not only be able to tank everything, but also increase outgoing damage. Number 3, the Ranger is a bit limited to all the pets that you have access during your leveling experience. So always keep an eye out for any juvenile pets whenever you can and tame them when you find them. Once you tame them, you unlock it forever. Given that the Ranger has high base vitality, they can focus on more offensive stats such as power, precision, condition damage, or expertise. I'd recommend the Berserker stats for strike damage, or perhaps even a more defensive route by leveling out with some toughness, which reduces incoming strike damage. The baseline improvements to condition damage, I'd always say go with Viper's gear set. That's about as all around strong as what you would need, or perhaps even going with the grieving stat for shorter open world fights. Best case scenario, or we'll say for the non-thinker, Celestials is always a great way to approach gear. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the elite specializations. First, we have the Druid, the elite specialization tied to the Heart of Thorns expansion. This elite spec gives access to glyph skills, which can change depending on what state you are in. The state changes come with the Celestial Avatar state, which this bar fills up while you are in combat until you activate it, turning you into your celestial form. You gain access to new skills that tend to be focused on healing allies in an area, as well as being able to damage enemies minorly. The glyph skills have different effects whether in the normal or the avatar state. When in the normal state, they tend to be more offensively oriented, and in the avatar state, they tend to be more supportive and healing oriented. The Druid also gains access to the Staff, or if you have the Weapon Master skill from Seekers of the Obscure. The Staff is a long-range poke weapon with some decent healing The Druid is a fantastic support and is welcome in many different groups. And let's be serious, the Druid really fits that nature mindset perfectly. Next, we have the Soul Beast, the Path of Fire elite specialization. The crowning feature of the Soul Beast is their capability to meld with their pet, removing them from the battlefield and gaining increasing stat bonuses and skills based off of the pet that they are melded with. The Soul Beast can be a devastating powerhouse for many different builds, but the coolest is probably the Smoke Scale meld, which allows you to hit with an Omni Slash. The Soul Beast can also use stance skills, which allow unique effects for a few seconds once activated. And then, of course, the weapon that was associated with the Soul Beast was the Main Hand Dagger, which, as we've covered, can overload enemies with some heavy conditions. The Soul Beast is one of the more popular elite specializations for the Ranger because it can be incredibly simple and incredibly powerful. Finally, we have the Untamed, the elite specialization for the End of Dragons expansion. This elite spec channels the power of the wilds, gaining access to the Unleash abilities, which can be transferred to either the Ranger or their pet. When the pet is unleashed, they gain access to empowered skill sets that can chill, slow, and damage enemies. When the Untamed is unleashed, they gain access to ambush skills, which have extra effects and extra damage, only available for a little period of time. And these skills can devastate groups of enemies all at once. The Untamed can bounce back and forth between who is unleashed at any given moment, however the skills all have their own internal cooldowns. The Untamed gains access to cantrips, which tend to be defensively oriented skills that can control enemies, shadow step the Untamed, and even improve their survival capabilities. And lastly, of course, tied to the Untamed is their hammer, with big beefy swings. The Untamed can quite literally smash enemies into bits with its brutal swings, and you gotta shout out those bunny thumpers from Guild Wars 1, huh? The Untamed is one of the most unique elite specializations from the End of Dragons expansion and offers a seriously fun way to bash foes with wild force. Regardless of the approach, the Ranger is the epitome of versatility, being able to improve, adapt, and overcome anything thrown their way. With their trusty pet at their side, they are unstoppable. So you like stealth, evasion, and overall elusiveness, and now you've landed on the Thief in Guild Wars 2, the resident assassin for this game. But you are getting completely trash canned by all sorts of mobs with your very small health pool and little toughness, and you left to wonder, what the heck was that? Well, that's where I'm going to try to help you. This is the new player's guide to the Thief in Guild Wars 2. While the emphasis will be on the core spec, I will briefly touch on the Daredevil, the Deadeye, and the Spectre. Let's get into it. So there are a few mechanics that the Thief has to work with. First, the major mechanic is steal. Steal shadow steps to your target and steals an item from them. The new item that is stolen becomes your second action button, which offers a one-time use skill per steal. Just about every stolen item has some type of unique use, such as stealing from a warrior allows you to use a spinning attack, or stealing from an engineer allows you to throw some gunk at your enemies. Against NPCs, it can offer a random assortment of bundles, depending on the type of enemy you are facing, such as a Moa can grant you a Tuft of Feathers or a Healing Egg. Steal has a relatively short cooldown before it can be used again. The other major profession mechanics are initiative, stealth attacks, and dual attacks. Stealth and dual attacks I will cover when we talk about weapons. Initiative is the main resource thieves use to activate their weapon abilities. Each weapon's skill costs initiative, and it regenerates slowly over time. If the thief runs out of initiative, then all they can use is their basic attack until they have the initiative to cast other skills. The trait lines of the Thief look to enhance certain aspects of their combat as well, of course, as their elusiveness. The core 5 traits are Deadly Arts, Critical Strikes, Shadow Arts, Acrobatics, and Trickery. Deadly Arts focuses on improving daggers as well as applying poison, also excellent at dispatching low health enemies. Critical Strikes focus on just that, critical hits and critical damage. This can also improve signets and pistol weapon skills. Shadow Arts offers various bonuses to stealth as well as applying blinding. Acrobatics focuses on elusiveness, improving dodging and mobility, while Trickery has an emphasis on improving your profession mechanic of steal as well as initiative regeneration. There are quite a few capabilities that the Thief has at their disposal. So as a disclaimer, at the time of recording this video, the elite specialization weapons are not available to the core specs. However, in the new expansion, Secrets of the Obscure, the Thief will gain access to the Staff from the Daredevil, the Rifle from the Deadeye, and the Scepter from the Spectre. Let's cover the basic weapons first. The Thief has access to a variety of weapons that can offer sneaky combat, mobility, as well as evasiveness. The Thief can use a short bow, a main hand sword, a main hand dagger, the main hand pistol, pair that with an offhand dagger and an offhand pistol. The Thief has access to weapon swapping as well. Each of the main hand weapons offers a stealth attack, which is available only, of course, when the Thief is stealth. When the Thief combines a main hand weapon and an offhand weapon, their third weapon skill becomes a dual attack, which usually has a powerful effect. The short bow offers a number of ranged damaging abilities that can inflict heavy conditions onto multiple enemies. Most notably is the Infiltrator arrow, which allows you to shoot a location and then shadow step to it once it lands. The stealth attack for the short bow is Surprise Shot, which immobilizes and bleeds enemies that are struck. The main hand sword offers high strike damage and great mobility, while its stealth attack blinds the target and implies vulnerability. If the ability hits from the side or from behind, it will instead daze the target, locking them out of using any skills for a short duration. The main hand dagger deals a lot of fast up-close damage, while also applying many condition. The stealth attack is Backstab, which strikes the enemy and deals double damage if the target is hit from behind. The main hand pistol inflicts bleeding and can immobilize foes, while the stealth attack deals damage rapidly, inflicting high stacks of bleeding. The offhand dagger can inflict conditions at distance, as well as granting on-demand stealth, while the offhand pistol can inflict crowd control and create a blinding smoke area which can be leapt through to grant stealth to the Thief or allies. The Thief will gain access to the main hand axe, which is both a condition or a power damage capable weapon. This axe throws out spinning axes and then can be recalled back to the Thief rapidly, dealing massive damage. Let's talk about the dual attack combinations. When the sword is paired with an offhand dagger, the Thief gains access to Flanking Strike, which evades attacks and deals damage, but then gains access to Lacernaeus Strike, which can remove boons from the target and deals more damage if the target has no boons. The main hand sword paired with the offhand pistol gains Pistol Whip, that stuns enemies and then repeatedly slashes them with the sword. The main hand dagger paired with the offhand dagger gains Death Blossom, where the Thief evades over the target and inflicts high bleeding stacks. The main hand dagger paired with the offhand pistol gains access to Shadow Shot, which shoots an unblockable shot at your target, blinds them, and then shadow steps to the target and finishes with a swift dagger strike. The main hand pistol paired with the offhand dagger gains access to Shadow Strike, which stabs your target and shadow steps away to shoot them again, which then unlocks the ability Repeater, which rapidly blasts your target, inflicting heavy bleeding to them. The main hand pistol and offhand pistol gains access to the Unload ability, which rapidly blasts enemies with both pistols, gaining might and regenerating some initiative if all attacks hit. Truly deadly combinations. The Thief has access to 5 sets of utility skills that offer quite a variety of sneaky ways to overcome enemies and obstacles. The Thief has Deception, Preparation, Signets, Tricks, and Venom. The Deception skills focus on stealth, shadow stepping, and other various tools to make the fight unfair for their enemies. Preparation skills function similar to traps, with the caveat that the Thief can activate them on demand when the time is right. Signets offer a variety of passive and active effects. When utilizing the active effect, it puts the passive effect on cooldown until the ability is able to be used again. Trick skills improve evasiveness and control on enemies by pulling and crippling them. The Venom skills allow the Thief to coat their weapons in animal venom for deadly effects on the next few attacks. Regardless of the choice, the Thief is well prepared from the shadows. The Thief, being evasive and elusive, usually isn't suited for sustained upfront melee combat, relying on mobility and stealth to overwhelm and confuse foes. Utilizing their shadow steps and their range capabilities, the Thief can kite enemies for a very long period of time, and then dash in for the kill when the time is right. Most of the skills rely on timing, as once you are out of initiative, it takes time for that to regenerate, so careful calculation of each engagement is a must. On top of that, being able to utilize stealth to your advantage, especially when you need a moment respite for your initiative regeneration, can be the matter between defeating an enemy and in downstate. Because the Thief can utilize both power and condition damage, they can fit many different play styles and dish out some serious damage. But in my opinion, the best iteration is the double daggers with condition. It just feels right. So here are a few quick tips to get you on your way from the shadows. First, the double pistol setup, as far as weapons are concerned, can do a wide variety of damage while also keeping you relatively safe, which is great for beginner thieves or if you want a more low intense build. Number 2, remember that if you need to re-engage with an enemy, Steel shadow steps you to your target. Also, remember, Steel can put you back into harm's way if you are not careful. And number 3, lastly, don't forget to pull your initiative. Don't spam your abilities so fast that you run out and you have nothing left to do but auto attack. For the most part, the Thief can offer quite a variety of condition damage across the board, and thrive using such gear stats such as Vipers, or even a hybrid focus of Grieving. I would like to make a mention that in open world, most cases, even Celestial gear can be well suited for the rigors of combat. Power builds can also do fairly well in this sense, as well as the sword and daggers both have strong capabilities to deal strike damage both at melee and range. The Daredevil Elite specialization is from the Heart of Thorns expansion. The Daredevil epitomizes evading by adding an additional dodge bar to their kit, along with a number of ways to improve their fast and flowy combat style. The Daredevil thrives as a melee combatant, wielding the staff to brutalize and smash foes with swift attacks. The Daredevil also gains access to physical skills that bruise and break foes with startling ferocity. Most notably is their Grandmaster trait lines, which offer a unique way to customize their dodge roll, either in a bound that improves damage, a dodge that hurls condition-dealing daggers, or even a movement-freeing dodge that allows them to become even more elusive. Regardless, the Daredevil can flow through combat and crash like water. The Deadeye is the elite specialization for the Path of Fire expansion. This is the true sniper in Guild Wars 2, allowing the Thief to modify their Steel ability into Deadeye's Mark. Once marked, the Thief increases damage done to that target and also builds up a secondary resource called Malice. Malice can be expended on modified stealth attacks called Malicious Stealth Attacks that expunge all Malice stacks to deal heavily increased strike or condition damage. Of course, no sniper would be complete if they didn't have a rifle to equip and attack at great range. The Deadeye also gains access to cantrip abilities, which offer defensive and elusive capabilities for the sharpshooter. Targets marked, rifle set, boom. Lastly, we have the Spectre. The Spectre is the End of Dragon's elite specialization, and it allows the Thief to embody the shadows to inflict high condition damage to targets, while also providing supportive capabilities to allies. The Steel ability becomes Siphon, which allows the Spectre to generate Shadow Force. Shadow Force is used on Shadow Form, a brand new set of skills and abilities that allow the Spectre to deal increased damage and conditions for a time. The Spectre can also tether themselves to allies, allowing them to heal and support them whilst also dealing heavy condition damage to allies. The Spectre also picks up the Scepter that allows them to stack barriers onto allies or to deal torment and other conditions to enemies. And lastly, the Spectre gains access to Wells that give them the capability of supporting allies while also devastating groups of clumped up enemies foolish enough to stand inside. The shadows are alive and torment awaits. Regardless of your approach, the Thief is without a doubt one of the fastest, elusive combatants in Guild Wars 2, and is adept at surprising enemies and bursting them down before they can even retaliate. Beware, what you don't see can hurt you. So you wanted to blow things up with aggressive force and explosions, but you're unsure of how to get started. I mean, I have weapon kits out the wazoo, but why do I need them? Don't I already have a weapon? Well, that's where I'm going to help you out. Here's a new player's guide for the Engineer in Guild Wars 2. While this guide will focus mainly on the core spec, I will briefly describe the Scrapper, the Hollowsmith, and the Mechanist elite specializations. Here we go. So any good Engineer has lots of tricks up their sleeve. In Guild Wars 2, they are no different. The Tool Belt is the profession mechanic, and it is as versatile as the Engineer. The Tool Belt offers a miniature skill based off of the utility skills that you choose. When you swap out the utility skill, the Tool Belt skill changes as well. Each utility skill has a specific Tool Belt skill that it is associated with. This also carries over for the heal and elite skills. This is where a lot of the customization capabilities come from, and given the amount of skills and choices at your disposal, the Engineer can mix and match quite unique and effective builds across the board. The trait lines for the Engineer look to improve various components of combat for their mechanical genius. Most excitingly is probably the Explosion trait line. This improves strike damage, ferocity, and applies a lot of vulnerability. Vulnerability causes targets to take more damage. Firearms look to improve your weapons, as well as offering ways to improve condition damage by inflicting bleeding on critical hits. The Invention trait line improves healing and survivability. It also improves shield skills. Alchemy improves various effects of cleansing, healing, and self-defense, with many of the skills offering automatic defenses when you are disabled or have a certain amount of conditions applied to yourself. The Tools trait line improves the tool belt skills that you choose, as well as offering some unique interactions with using the tool belt skills, with extra strike damage and fury generation. As a disclaimer, at the time of recording this, the new expansion, Secrets of the Obscure, will offer the elite specialization weapons baseline to all specializations, including core. However, in this video, I will cover specifically the current core weapon sets. The Engineer only has a few options as far as weapons are concerned, between the two-handed rifle, the pistol main hand and offhand, and of course the shield. The rifle offers quite a bit of mobility as well as some insane strike damage. Oh, by the way, the main attacks also throw a grenade. The main hand pistol offers a lot of conditions, including bleeding, poison, and confusion, while the offhand pistol adds burning to the mix as well as an area immobilize and cripple. The offhand shield offers ways to block attacks and even reflect range attacks, also offers some great crowd control. That's it. Well, the Engineer can use a short bow that shoots unblockable arrows that implant onto the ground and can be triggered to heal and support allies or to damage enemies. The utility skills are exactly what you would expect from a cunning genius. They have elixirs, engineering kits, turrets, and gadgets. The elixirs are various potions that can be utilized on demand that provide a lot of boons, cure conditions, and can even shrink you super small. Oh, by the way, the elite skill can turn you into a vicious tornado or a frothing berserker. The gadgets offer various forms of crowd control and mobility, with some explosions. Probably the most unique is the turret skills that set down an automated turret that attacks the nearest enemies, with explosions, flamethrowers, bullets, and even a thumper turret that can knock down and slow enemies. The elite skill calls a turret supply drop that spawns multiple turrets while stunning enemies. To compensate for the low amount of weapons that the Engineer has access to, they make up for it with engineering kits as a utility skill. These kits can be swapped into or out of at any time, and they offer a brand new set of skills with their own internal cooldown, like the grenade kit, flamethrower kit, bomb kit, or the med kit. Even the elite skill mortar kit to assail enemies at crazy long distance. Outside of the Mechanist, most Engineer builds include a weapon kit of some fashion, mainly the grenade and mortar kits. Literally, each one of these utility skills change the corresponding tool belt skill, so keep this in mind as versatility is the name of the game. The playstyle of the Engineer depends on the style of Engineer you are aiming to be. Typically, most Engineer builds include one, if not more, engineering kits to round out your weapon choices, and as such can drastically change your approach to combat. Most kits, however, have more ranged-oriented damage, so being able to kite enemies around as you pelt them with your various attacks will provide great damage but also keep you alive. Deploying a turret or two can provide some consistent damage as well as a target for the mobs to hit, all the while you are blasting them from all of the different kits and skills that you have. The tool belt skills also provide some incredibly unique interactions, so be mindful that there may be a time and place to use them versus just throwing them down at any old time. For example, the Toss Elixir X, which is the elite tool belt skill for Elixir X, turns all enemies in that area who were struck into MOAs, making them essentially defenseless. There are so many different ways to play the Engineer that there is no one right way. You will find the one that fits best for you. The gear choices for the Engineer can change back and forth depending on what form of endgame content you are looking to do. Given that the Engineer has a decent amount of toughness and vitality, you can lean into more offensive stats, like Berserkers for power and precision, or Vipers for condition damage. Typically, if you are using a rifle, you want to match with a power stat build, and if you are utilizing the pistol, you are going to aim for condition damage, precision, or expertise. If you are looking to heal or support in any fashion, you want to look at concentration and healing power. If you don't want to think about it, Celestial gear stats are always a great choice. Here are some leveling tips to get you started as you get into the Engineer. Number 1, the turrets are always a good choice for tanking mobs, as a good portion of the time the enemies will focus on them, allowing you to assail from a distance. Number 2, the engineering kits have no cooldowns on swapping in or out, and typically their cooldowns come up fairly quickly. And number 3, tool belt skills have specific and unique uses. Some are damage, some are defensive, some offer crowd control. Remember to kit out to cover all of your bases. Now let's talk about the elite specialization for the Heart of Thorns expansion in the Scrapper. The Scrapper changes out the elite tool belt skill button for the function gyro, which creates a lightning field, but more importantly, it can finish downed enemies or res fallen allies. And the best part, this happens automatically. The Scrapper picks up a massive hammer to beat and blast enemies into bits. Not only does it provide strong damage, it applies a block and even a long-range stun. The new utility skills are wells, which create powerful areas of effect for the Scrapper and their allies to combo in and out of. The Scrapper trait lines allow it to generate a lot of might, stability, and even apply quickness to themselves and allies. Unique to the Scrapper, the more strike damage they deal, they gain a barrier in proportion to 5% of the damage dealt, clearly bringing the boom. Next, let's go ahead and talk about the Hollowsmith, the elite specialization for the Path of Fire expansion. The Hollowsmith forgoes its 5th tool belt skill for Photon Forge. This replaces the baseline weapon skills and allows the Hollowsmith to create hard light effigies to obliterate foes. This does, however, have a timeline, as it does generate heat, a secondary bar underneath the tool belt skill. If you reach maximum heat, you will explode, dealing a burst of damage to yourself, as well as inflicting burning for a duration to yourself. This also locks you out of accessing the Photon Forge for a short time. The Hollowsmith gains the Sword main hand to slice and dice enemies. The sword gains extra effects and damage depending on the current heat level that the Hollowsmith has. The Hollowsmith gains Exceed skills that have a variety of control and defensive uses. These skills are improved based off of the heat level that you currently have. Lastly, the trait lines look to improve various aspects of the Photon Forge. Most uniquely is the Photon Blasting module, that instead of dealing the burst damage from overheating being done to you, it is instead a miniature nuke onto nearby enemies. However, the burning still occurs to you. The Hollowsmith really does turn up the heat. Lastly, let's go ahead and talk about the Mechanist, the elite specialization for the End of Dragons expansion. The Mechanist forgoes its tool belt profession mechanic in favor of, well, the mech. This jolly green giant can be modified from a number of trait line choices and offers a wide variety of customization choices. The Mechanist picks up a mace main hand to pummel and blast enemies from a distance or up close. This also applies a lot of confusion. The Mechanist picks up the Signet skills that have strong passive and powerful active effects. Most notably is the elite skill, Overclock Signet, which recharges the cooldown of all other Signets passively, but actively can cause your mech to summon a beam of burning death to devastate groups of enemies. If your mech is down and not able to be summoned, it will fully revive the mech instead, summoning it to the battlefield. The trait lines are where the customization comes in. The Mechanist trait line changes the mech's active abilities based off of the choices within this line. Each trait grants the mech one of 3 abilities. Typically, there's an optimal route, choosing either strike or condition damage or supportive capabilities. The traits also apply small passives that improve various combat routines. If the Mechanist needs to, they can remove their mech from combat, allowing it to heal, and then summon it back when they truly need it. And uniquely, the Grandmaster trait choice, J-Drive, allows the mech to still strike from orbit while dismissed or away. Talk about falling from the stars. Regardless the method, the Engineer offers some of the most unique gameplay across any class in MMORPGs. Between the various tools, traits, and turrets, not to mention the explosions, they are the true jack of all trades, master of none. Are you ready to blow this popsicle stand? So you've been interested in playing the shadowy boy in the Necromancer because, let's be serious, anyone who can control undeath instantly has your attention. The Necromancer still has quite a bit of complexity between skills, weapon choices, minions, self-inflicted curses. It can be a lot for a new player. Well, that's where I'm going to help you. This is how to play the Necromancer and their elite specializations. While the emphasis will be on the core spec, I will briefly touch on the Reaper, the Scourge, and the Harbinger. First, let's go ahead and talk about the profession mechanic in the Death Shroud. This bar fills up with life force as you utilize skills and abilities. Once you have some life force, you can activate the Death Shroud, which gives you a brand new set of incredibly powerful abilities. On top of that, the Shroud acts as a secondary health bar. It drains quickly while within the Shroud, but taking damage will remove the Shroud even faster. The Shroud can be activated with only a little bit of life force, but generally speaking, it works better to have higher amounts before stepping into the Shroud. Not only does it deal some great damage, but it has crowd control, movement abilities, and even an area life sap that helps you stay in Death Shroud for longer. Once exited, the Necromancer will not be able to enter the Shroud for a short time. Managing your Shroud and your life force in some cases may be tricky, as staying inside of the Shroud for a while is generally the best. However, it may be better suited to utilize some of the abilities for a time and then swap out for some of your weapon skills. The trade lines of the Necromancer have a variety of different skills and choices that can fit a number of playstyles depending on how they would like to approach combat. The Spite trade line tends to focus more on strike damage, which is damage done instantly from weapons and skills. Whereas the Curse trait line has a heavy emphasis on condition damage, which is damage done over time, or dots. Death Magic is oriented around defenses by granting Carapace, which gives you stacking toughness from a variety of sources. Toughness reduces the incoming strike damage that you take. This trait line also improves minions. Pay attention to that one. The Blood Magic trade line gives a ton of lifesteal and sustain and can even stop allies from bleeding out when they are in down state. And Soul Reaping massively improves your Shroud ability and also allows you to inflict a number of conditions from the main Shroud attack. These can all synchronize extremely well and allow for a lot of unique build styles, although the Necromancer tends to be leaning towards the condition damage oriented builds. The Necromancer has a variety of weapons at their disposal, as well as being able to swap between two weapon sets while in combat. Probably the most popular for the Necromancer is the Staff. This weapon offers a ton of conditions, crowd control, and some decent damage. This weapon also has incredible range at 1200 units. The Scepter is a condition damage oriented weapon that can slow and bleed enemies while also taking buffs from the enemies and turning them into conditions. The Axe, however, is more strike damage oriented, where it can inflict a ton of vulnerability, which causes the target to take more and more damage as it stacks higher. The Axe can also convert enemy buffs, which we call boons here, to conditions. Both the Scepter and the Axe are mid-range weapons, whereas the Scepter has 900 units and the Axe has 600 units. The Dagger is by far the closest weapon with a range of 130, but it is excellent at sapping health from enemies and also inflicting a number of conditions. The Offhand Dagger has an emphasis on transferring conditions and bleeding enemies in an area at range. The Focus can steal health while also inflicting a number of vulnerability stacks onto the target, as well as being able to rip boons from the target, dealing heavy strike damage. The Warhorn fears enemies and grants some lifesteal, while also giving some swiftness to allies. Swiftness allows you to move significantly faster for a short period of time. Upcoming, the Necromancer will be able to utilize dual swords that deal strong strike damage while also healing the Necromancer in the meantime. The utility skills for the Necromancer have quite a few variety of paths that can be taken. Because the Necromancer can transfer a lot of their conditions to enemies, some of the skills of the Necromancers, specifically the Corruption line, inflicts conditions on the Necromancer themselves. The management of those conditions can be key, and hence why the Necromancer tends to lean heavily towards the condition damage builds, as they have a variety of ways to handle and enhance them. The Necromancer also has well abilities, which summon powerful area of effect that benefit allies and typically decimate enemies. Signet abilities have passive and active effects. Passively, they offer some moderate effects, while their active abilities tend to be much more powerful. Once used, the Signet's passive abilities go on cooldown until the Signet comes back up. These tend to be more defensive and healing skills. A really unique skill set to the game that the Necromancer has access to is spectral skills. These function usually in a defensive manner, breaking crowd control, creating protective areas and helping the survivability of the Necromancer. And possibly the best reason to play the Necromancer is their minion skills. These summon small bone and flesh creatures that attack and rip away at your enemies. Each one of these minions also have an extra ability that either controls enemies or deals damage. Regardless of the approach, the Necromancer has a diverse skill set to handle any situation. The Necromancer generally thrives in all forms of content in Guild Wars 2. Their minions can overwhelm and devastate enemies, while the sheer amount of conditions rot away at their health bars. Because of the fairly easy and simple nature of the Necromancer, they can usually take more aggressive skills, emphasizing damage and improving their shroud capabilities. Given that most of the Necromancer abilities are at range, they can safely assail targets and kite with various movement abilities without much difficulty. When handling elite or champion mobs, your skill kit may have to change to focus a bit on protection and defenses, maybe taking the death magic traits for the overall increase to toughness to pair with the high health bar and shroud abilities. Even large groups of enemies can be decimated by the crazy amount of area of effect damage that the Necromancer brings to the table. Now, even when kitted out to be straight power damage, the core Necromancer doesn't burst as well, say, as a Thief or even a Mesmer. But where it lacks in upfront damage, it makes up for it in consistent damage over time. When leveling a Necromancer, I recommend filling out the minion skill set first, as once the Necromancer has minions to tank and distract enemies, it makes the rest of leveling incredibly simple. The minions tank, you DPS. It's pretty straightforward. I'd also recommend choosing the Soul Reaping trait line first, as this improves your main shroud ability, where a good percentage of your overall damage should come from. The trait line also increases how long you can stay in the shroud, as well as reducing its cooldown after you left. Lastly, as you're leveling, I'd personally say try to avoid using the dagger main hand, as it requires closer range and potentially tricky combat. Not saying that it's a bad weapon, but I feel like sacrificing the range with everything else that you use isn't worth it. Perhaps this is just my opinion here. If you are a new player, make sure to like and subscribe to the Caffeinated Dad gaming channel, where we talk about all sorts of shenanigans here in Guild Wars 2. The Necromancer can go a number of different ways when it comes to gear stat choices, depending on the endgame mode. In open world, they can utilize any major forms of stats, such as Berserkers for strike damage, or Vipers for condition damage, or even go with the Celestial route, which increases all of your stats. Celestial tends to be a great pick here as well because of the hybrid damage that the Necromancer brings to the table. On top of the Death Shroud abilities and minions make this incredibly durable and moderately strong stat choice. Because of the high HP pool and the access to Shroud as a secondary life bar, the Necromancer can of course go into more damage-oriented routes, which here I'd recommend Viper's gear set for the overall damage for condition builds, or a cheaper alternative maybe switching over to a power-focused build and picking up the Berserker stat line, as these pieces can be bought for significantly less amount of gold. Whichever way you decide to go, you can make great use out of any of the common gear stats. For rune choices, especially if you're running a condition build, I'd suggest Rune of Nightmares, as for a very common condition damage trait in Terror, causes your fears now to inflict damage. The duration is further improved by utilizing this rune. If you're going to go the power route, you can run the Scholar runes, as for the most part you will be fairly healthy dealing with most enemies. The Reaper is without a doubt one of the most fun elite specializations in the game. It puts the Necromancer into melee, giving them a massive greatsword, and then changing their Shroud ability into Reaper Shroud, a highly offensive oriented version of the Death Shroud. It decays significantly faster, but it makes up with it for pure damage output. One specific ability to note is Gravedigger, which deals massive damage after a windup. However, if it strikes an enemy who is below 50% HP, the cooldown is reset, allowing you to spam this. The Greatsword has a variety of controlling abilities, ones that inflict condition or pull enemies closer towards you. The main feature of this elite specialization is the chilling effect. Chilling slows enemies down and causes them to move slower and slows down the recharge of their abilities. When the Reaper attacks chilled enemies, they deal massively increased damage to them. The Reaper also gains the abilities to use shout skills, which buff the Reaper and debilitate enemies. Overall, this spec is ice cold. The Scourge is the Path of Fire elite specialization for the Necromancer, and it is incredibly versatile when it comes to build flexibility. This spec forgoes a Shroud altogether in favor of Shades. Shades are summon areas that inflict torment and can utilize the other Shade abilities. As a Scourge is in combat, it generates life force, and the life force can then be spent utilizing these Shade abilities. These can inflict fear, convert conditions on allies to boons, grant incredibly powerful barriers, and even pulse torment to enemies and pulse barriers to allies at the same time. The Scourge grabs a torch as a weapon, which inflicts a number of conditions and can even crowd control some enemies. The Scourge also gains access to punishment skills, which inflict a number of conditions on enemies, whilst also applying a significant amount of barrier to any allies within that area. The Scourge can function amazingly as a condition DPS or as a support, given the sheer amount of a barrier that they can apply. This spec really brings the heat. The Harbinger is the End of Dragon's elite specialization for the Necromancer, and it is highly offensively oriented. The Harbinger forgoes the extra health bar for their Shroud to amp up the damage massively. Even more aggressive, they inflict themselves with Blight, a stacking reduction to their total health pool. The Harbinger Shroud is significantly more aggressive than the other Shrouds, offering high damage and mobility at the sacrifice of the aforementioned extra health bar. The Harbinger also learns how to utilize elixirs that have a variety of effects. When they throw them at enemies, it deals damage and inflicts conditions. Once the Harbinger reaches a certain amount of Blight stacks, their elixir abilities deal double damage and inflict more conditions on the enemies. When not throwing elixirs, the Harbinger utilizes a pistol loaded with noxious bullets to inflict conditions and damage enemies. This spec really lives on the edge. The Necromancer has a wide variety of skills, traits, and ability to handle anything Tyria can throw at it. Despite being a light armor class, it is incredibly powerful and easy to pick up and play. The Necromancer provides some of the most unique gameplay combat across any MMORPGs, as again, who doesn't want to master the powers of undeath? So you've been wanting to play the spicy boy in the Elementalist, but you've heard literally from everyone that Ellie is downstate rotation. It has so much going on with it, and it's incredibly hard, and mostly that is true. The Elementalist is not an easy class to play, let alone master, but that is where I'm hoping to help you. This is a complete guide to get you competent on the Elementalist and its elite specializations. We will start with simple concepts, playstyles, and then gearing, and of course move into more of the elite specializations and their gameplay, and more specifically, what you can do to avoid downstate. Let's start out with the most important lesson, which is, of course, your attunements. As a rule of thumb for your 4 attunements, they function essentially the same way with each weapon that you utilize. Fire is burning and strike damage, water is chilling, healing, and cleansing, air is strike damage, weakness, vulnerability, and crowd control, some blinding. And of course, earth is defenses, bleeding, crippling, immobilizing effects, and even reflective auras. As you play the profession, you will be able to understand the flow that the Elementalist has. This will be discussed a little bit more when we talk about gameplay. These attunements will be enhanced depending on the trait lines that you choose, such as the fire trait line baseline gives you a fire aura when you jump into fire attunement. Air trait line gives you movement speed when you switch into it, and so on and so forth. This also does not mean that you should avoid the attunements that you did not trait into. Even if you don't go through the water trait line, water attunement still offers fantastic healing. Earth attunement still gives great defenses, so don't skip them. Because of the constant need to switch back and forth, the first lesson that you should learn is setting up your keybinds for your attunements. Having them set to something like a mouse side button or even a quick combination of keys can work. Personally, I have mine set as Shift 1, Shift 2, Shift 3, and then Shift Q for each of the 4 attunements. Set what works best for you, and then you are one step towards playing the Ellie. Now, let's take a look at your trait lines since we brought them up. As mentioned, each trait line you choose improves the corresponding attunement that you enter. Arcane is the only one that is not tied to a specific attunement, but improves your attunement swapping baseline, and that has a mix of traits that improve a variety of things, boon uptime, condition, and even some healing. Having said that, your focus of each of these trait lines should be looking to maximize the capabilities of those attunements and finding the appropriate pairing. For example, the air trait line has a trait One with Air that gives you super speed when you switch into air attunement. If you pair it with the Grandmaster trait, Fresh Air, you can drastically increase your super speed uptime by critically striking, then switching in and out of other attunements, and then back to the air attunement, constantly proccing this effect. Or you can pick the Fire line and use the Power Overwhelming trait, which gives you extra power when you are at or above a certain might boon threshold. And what you do here is pair it with Pyromancer's Puissance, which gives you might stacks when using any of the baseline skills in Fire Attunement. This next point is to make sure that your trait lines are cohesive and not pulling in too many different directions. Research some up-to-date builds for the Elementalist. You can find these on MetaBattle for general use, Snowcrows for top-end DPS builds, or Guild Gen for PvP World v World builds. Links are included in the description below. Now, it's important in your weapon choice as this dictates how you will play. First, understand that the Elementalist cannot weapon swap in combat. I mean, we already have 5 skills for each of the 4 attunements, that means 20 active skills at any given time. Lots of things to do. Let's not make it any more complicated. Your weapon choice is critical for this. Base Elementalist has access to the Staff for long range damage, Scepter for medium, and Dagger for close range. Elementalists can also pair the Scepter or Dagger with a Focus or Dagger offhand to give themselves a desired combination. Focusing on the Staff first, it offers great range and decent AoE strike damage, as well as great support through their water and air attunements. The Staff, while at a safe range, typically hits the weakest out of the weapon choices for the Elementalist. With group support, however, in various game modes such as World vs. World, the Staff skyrockets in value, as it has a ton of area of damage, effects, and control. The Scepter is a mid-range weapon that is very strong both at condition damage as well as strike damage, but also brings some balance with defenses and healing through the Earth and Water attunement. This weapon works exceptionally well for those of you who know how to keep your distance and keep damaging foes. Dagger is close range and, rightfully so, high damage, as well as being similar to the Scepter in the fact that it can crowd control, it can heal, it can do both strike and condition damage. This weapon, however, has the shortest range and requires the players to be able to manage themselves while being attacked in melee, or at least being chased in melee. The Focus and the Dagger both have great added effects, keeping in the mind that the Focus sits mostly at ranged, the Dagger focusing at close range. The Elementalist will soon be able to utilize the Pistol main hand, which offers charges depending on the attunement that the Elementalist is in. This weapon focuses heavily on condition damage. Having said all this, there is not a secret to the weapon skills that you will get in any attunement. Similar to the way that the Revenant and their legendary stances play, you get the same skills every single time. This is what messes with a few new Elementalists, as they tend to get anxious with kiting and remembering the correct skills at any given position. Take the time to incorporate muscle memory. This will absolutely be one of the most important points for you to learn, especially about the weapons. Integrate the patterns and skills into memory by practicing, and it will vastly improve your capabilities as a blossoming Elementalist. What is your biggest hurdle when playing the Elementalist? Tell me in the comment section down below. I'm curious. Next, let's look at our last point, the utility skills. The utility skills vary from effectiveness and the traits that you choose, and in my experience, the core utility skills are not all equal, save for some, of course, niche circumstances. The popular / stronger ones tend to be the cantrips, signets, and glyphs, whereas conjured weapons and arcane skills are not as up to par. That is not to say that you shouldn't use them. If you enjoy playing with a conjured fire axe or the arcane shield skill, by all means, please do so. But most optimal builds utilize the other 3 categories depending on the game mode. Signets are probably the most used because of the offensive and defensive capabilities that they bring. For example, in open world and PvE, the Signet of Fire and the Signet of Restoration work incredibly well, whereas in PvP and World v World, Signet of Air is always a decent choice. These skills work fantastically when you incorporate the Earth Grandmaster trait, which is written in stone, which allows you to keep the passive effect even after using the active effect of a signet. Next is glyphs. These are more popular in PvE as they can have great effect on relatively stationary targets, whereas cantrips are more defensive utility skills, and of course my favorite recommendation is the lightning flash ability. Cantrips can be very strong in PvP and World v World as they have stun breaks, cleansing, and even temporary invulnerability. Now, the conjured weapons can have some niche or meme usage. For a while, the best PvP Elementalist build in the Catalyst was utilizing a conjured Earth Shield as its utility skill. I've personally used the Lightning Hammer to absolutely obliterate people. I mean, outside of that, the elite weapon skill Fiery Greatsword is utilized in top-end DPS builds for strike damage, but outside of just using a handful of skills, and they don't really see all that much use after that. The Arcane line works as an emphasis to trigger critical strikes. In turn, can proc certain traits like Burning or Arcane Precision. In the end, all skills can be used, but as mentioned, there are a few that are significantly stronger than others, currently. Major point here being understanding how and when to use these skill choices. Realize what style of play you are after with your weapon and your other skills and trait lines, and pick the ones that complement it the best. Okay, so now let's take a look at playstyle for the Elementalist. Because of the flowy nature of the attunements, it does not always pay to sit in a single attunement and cast the same ability over and over again until the other one comes back up. Choosing the right flow for your combat and when you need to switch attunements is what will make you a competent elemental wielder. Generally speaking, the Elementalist works best by their ability to sustain. They have some incredibly strong bursts, but realize that their ability to survive in combat by utilizing all 4 elements is where they shine. Depending on the weapon choice, your first priority here is to choose your engagement. Knowing that the Elementalist is not necessarily the most durable class when handling elite or champion level mobs, this may require you to switch your weapons or your skills to survive that particular encounter. Instead of using daggers, you switch to Scepter for the range, and perhaps select the Super Speed Fresh Air build, which allows you to kite almost indefinitely, and keep enemies at bay while you whittle them down. This of course is just an example, but analyzing what you can and cannot take down can greatly improve your time as an Elementalist. You may come across a time where you need to use the water attunement for its healing, but it is on cooldown. In these circumstances, it's best for you to use either your mobility or defensive utility skills to keep you alive until you can access water again. Lightning Flash, as mentioned, is my go-to. So I may flash to create distance and then keep moving until water attunement is ready again. As a point as well, never forget that air and earth both have great crowd control, and sometimes crowd controlling enemies may be the difference between life and downstate. You will find what works best for how you would like to play, and where you want to be. But remember, mobility and sustain is the Elementalist's best friend. My recommendation, aside from these points that I've already made, is first learning Glyph of Lesser Elementals, as this gives you a pet that can hold aggro and deal damage while you kite and pepper down foes. My second point to assist in the leveling process is pay attention to your item gear levels. Because the Elementalist is already fairly squishy, if you are in a level 40 story mission and you still have a level 13 piece of gear, it might be time to upgrade. I suggest taking a look at the trading post, as most gear under the level of 80 is fairly cheap. Alright, so I'm going to briefly talk about gear and builds because of the sheer amount of different builds that are out there. I'm going to talk general use, and as you understand more of the Elementalist, you can make better assessments at which you think would fit your playstyle best. I've linked a build down below that I believe works well for open world and most content as a core Elementalist. The core LE, and really any form of Elementalist, can thrive utilizing the Celestial stat line, which can be basically your best friend for all content. It offers defenses, healing, condition, power, you name it. Every stat gets improved. This build has an emphasis on mobility and strike damage because we are taking fresh air, so when we critically hit, again, we gain super speed, as well as Fury to increase our critical strike chance further. We also use Glyph of Elementals that offers us other targets to distract our enemies so that we can keep attacking while not having to always worry about being attacked. When we use the elite skill, we are also spec'd into Final Shielding, which gives us an arcane shield proc for some extra protection and blocking. This build is great for general use and will be fantastic for those of you who are learning the Elementalist. If you are still new to the Elementalist, that means that you have to like this video and then subscribe. You got it, I just don't make the rules. Now let's take a look at the Tempest, the Heart of Thorns elite specialization. This takes the attunement swapping and slows it down, which after a short time allows you to overload the attunement you are currently in for those extra effects. This is a channeled ability, so it takes a couple of seconds to complete. My personal favorite is the Air Overload, which summons a massive thunderstorm around you, dealing high damage to enemies. All of these overload skills exemplify the attunement's main abilities. Overload Fire does more burning, Overload Air does some really good strike damage, Overload Water offers some crazy healing, and Overload Earth cripples and bleeds. The Tempest straight line has a stronger emphasis on boons and support of allies, as well as you could have guessed it, the Tempest is a fantastic support. They also have access to Alacrity, which is one of the key endgame PvE boons, reducing all cooldowns on allies who have this boon, Alacrity. Tempest also offers multiple sources of protection, as well as applying multiple auras to allies, but that's also not to say that they can't be a DPS. The Tempest gains access to the Warhorn as a weapon, which allows them to apply even more boons to allies and damage and control enemies. Their new utility skill is Shouts, which of course has a dual effect, usually aiding allies and harming enemies. Given this effect, the Tempest requires to be mid to close range to be effective for most content. They are similar to the core Ellie, as they are not incredibly durable in open world and PvE, but they work fantastic when you have a group of friends there to support you, so you can support them. Next, moving on to the Weaver, the Path of Fire specialization. This is a bit more challenging as they combine different attunements and offer a new weapon attack called a dual attack when they switch from one attunement to the next. The attunement swapping is rapidly sped up, allowing swapping to occur more frequently. The first two abilities of your weapon skills are from the attunement that you just switched into, and the last two are from the attunement that you just left, and the middle one being the dual attack. This is where the muscle memory comes into play. The Weaver straight lines focus around their dual attacks and improving mobility and swiftness uptime, mainly. This can also be selected to improve overall strike damage and condition damage. The Weaver's weapon in and of the sword, which puts them directly up in front in melee, with a wealth of attacks that can heal, control, and of course, damage enemies. Their dual attacks, with a number of conditions that are extremely powerful, also have a number of crowd controlling effects. The skills that the Weaver gains are the stances, which offer temporary benefits based off of the attunement that they currently are in, mostly. Their elite skill is without a doubt one of the most challenging skills to utilize properly, as it requires you to dance through all 4 attunements within a very short window. But if you can pull this off, you have a massive damage boost for a short period of time, as well as a very unique crowd control effect at the end. Now, the main playstyle of the Weaver, especially the Sword Weaver, is a tankier, sustained master, able to stay in and last longer than most enemies, utilizing their barriers and healing, while also doing a ton of damage from both sides. The Weaver is a fantastic choice in a number of endgame situations, with heavy emphasis on DPS, both strike and condition. Lastly, let's talk about our big boy, the Catalyst, the End of Dragon's elite specialization, and one of my personal favorites. The attunements are normalized here, but the Catalyst gains access to the Jade Sphere, which lays down a field to allow them to use combo finishers within it. The Jade Sphere operates on an energy system, so as you are using weapon skills, you gain energy. The main emphasis of the Catalyst is aura generation. Every single finisher that they use grants them an aura. When they gain an aura, they gain a stack of elemental empowerment, which increases all stats up to a cap of 10. The trait lines look to enhance this effect of elemental empowerment, while also producing side effects from the aura generation, such as damage reduction, damage output increases, things of that sort. And the weapon is the Hammer, which is of course a very close melee ranged weapon, emphasizing on defenses and durability, while also packing a punch in both fire and air. The stacks that we get from elemental empowerment allows us to stay in combat for longer durations with our buffed stat capabilities. The Hammer Catalyst also has their Circulars, which is their Hammer ability 3, that provide passive effects while active for a short duration. The duration can be increased when you switch to a new attunement and then use that Circular. And once you have cycled through all 4 attunements, you can cast Grand Finale, which deals the effects of all 4 elements that you just had, and if it is used within a combo field, it acts as a combo finisher. The Catalyst also gains access to the Augment abilities, which have a number of effects from damage, healing, defenses, and even stun breaks. They all have reduced cooldowns if they are used within their corresponding Jade Sphere field. The main playstyle of the Catalyst is an upfront burst melee combatant that has stuns, conditions, and even incredible healing and cleansing. Without a doubt, one of the strongest specs in the game, and of course, the Catalyst is great fun, in my opinion. Alright, so let's review the main points of the Elementalist so that you can start playing better. Number 1, keybind your attunements for easy access. Number 2, choose cohesive traits that match your build. Number 3, learn the weapons and remember the attunement skills. Number 4, pick utility skills that complement your weapon and build. Analyze and choose your engagements wisely. Focus on survival and play to the strengths of the Elementalist. Overall, the Elementalist is a fantastic profession, and hopefully this makes it a little bit easier for you to understand and play. So you've been interested in playing the Mesmer because you saw some player create 4 copies of himself and then beat down a group of enemies single-handedly. Well, kind of. You decide to create a character and you are now utterly confused. And no, not like the condition confused, you're actually confused. Well, that's where I'm going to help you out. This is the new player's guide to the Mesmer in Guild Wars 2 in 2023. This guide will have an emphasis on the core spec, but will touch briefly on the Necromancer, the Mirage, and the Virtuoso. The Mesmer has quite a unique profession mechanic in their shatter abilities. Mind Rack, which deals direct strike damage, or on-hit damage. Cry of Frustration, which deals condition damage over time. Diversion, which dazes the target. Remember, dazes interrupt the enemy and cause them not to be able to use any of their abilities for a time. However, they still can move around. Then lastly, Distortion, which grants the Mesmer temporary invulnerability for a short time. These shatter skills have their effects further enhanced by the amount of illusions that are shattered when the skills are used. Mesmers create clones and phantasms by utilizing weapons, utility skills, and even some traits. Clones are weaker copies of the Mesmer themselves, however they simply auto-attack nearby enemies, while phantasms are tied to weapon skills and perform a special attack before reverting back into a clone. Each time a clone is created, it appears here, right above the shatter skills. At any given time, the Mesmer can have a max of 3 clones up, and an unlimited number of phantasms, however they only stay up for a short period of time. When utilizing a shatter skill, it destroys all active clones, dealing more damage, having a longer daze or longer invulnerability based off of the amount of clones shattered. All of these shatter effects occur near the clones, but the Mesmer also casts the shatter at their location as well. Are you confused yet? The 5 trait lines that the Mesmer brings to the table are Domination, Dueling, Chaos, Inspiration, and Illusions. Domination has a heavy emphasis on interrupting enemies, whether it be stunning or dazing them, whilst also applying a number of stacks of vulnerability. Vulnerability is a condition that causes the target to take increased damage from all sources for a short time, stacking up to 25. Dueling has a great focus on dodging enemies and inflicting critical strikes. This trait line can also improve strike damage as well as condition damage. The Chaos trait line is defensive oriented and gives regeneration, which heals you over time. This also can randomly apply boons to yourself and conditions to enemies. Boons are the equivalent of buffs in Guild Wars 2. Inspiration is oriented around supporting allies and granting defensive boons, whereas the Illusion trait line vastly improves your shatter abilities, allowing you to deal more damage and apply more conditions to decimate foes. The Mesmer has quite a few varieties of trait line options. However, the Mesmer tends to have an emphasis on condition damage and confusion applications. The Mesmer has lots of really interesting weapons, specifically on how they are used. They have access also to weapon swap, allowing them to change between 2 weapon sets while they are in combat. Without a doubt, the coolest iteration of the weapon skills is through the Greatsword for the Mesmer. You use it completely at range, actually really far away, and you shoot a massive energy beam at targets, on top of doing great AoE damage with some crowd control. The staff tends to be more defensive oriented of a weapon, allowing the Mesmer to escape and protect themselves whilst also applying a number of conditions. The main hand scepter is a medium ranged weapon that is defensive oriented, but can also still apply a number of conditions and summon clones fairly quickly. The sword is a melee-oriented weapon that is focused on deceptive and evasive upfront combat. The offhand focus can improve your speed and slow enemy, whilst also damaging a number of enemies at the same time. The pistol can disable enemies and deal significant damage to a single target extremely quickly. The sword balances out some high damage with a block, and then the torch adds blinding, control, burning, and stealth to the kit. The Mesmer will receive the rifle, which is a support-style weapon, being able to assist allies from a long range. More importantly, teleport allies from a long range. Regardless of the weapon choice, the Mesmer can meet the demands of any situation. The utility skills of the Mesmer have quite a few options depending on the way that they wish to approach enemies' interior. Their utility skills are illusion, glamour, manipulation, mantra, and signets. Clearly, signets grant passive effects while they are equipped, and then have powerful on-demand active abilities when used. However, once these active abilities are used, their passive effect goes on cooldown until the skill is recharged. The illusion skills summon illusions on demand while giving you some added effects, either stealth, some blocking, or even removing boons from enemies. Glamour skills create powerful effects on the ground near your cursor, with a variety of different abilities, such as reflecting projectiles, allowing stealth, and even creating a portal for your allies to teleport through. Manipulation skills are more defensive oriented, allowing them to send conditions to your enemies or teleport a great distance. Some even allow you to revive allies temporarily to give them a chance at fighting again. Lastly, mantras, which have multiple charges, and the last charge being more powerful than the rest. These tend to be support oriented to allies and also capable of controlling enemies. Remember, deception and control is the name of the game for the Mesmer. The focus of any good Mesmer is going to be manipulate, distract, and overwhelm enemies. Because of the illusions tanking enemies, the Mesmer can inflict a number of conditions quickly and then stun and daze them while their health bars rot away. The trick to learning Mesmer is, of course, when you should use your shatters. Because your shatters delete your clones, you can be vulnerable to a counterattack, especially when dealing with stronger enemies. A good skill to learn is timing your shatters appropriately to allow their full effects to go through, but being able to summon new clones quickly to distract your enemies and tank them for you. When using the Mesmer, remember you have quite a number of escapes and stealth to boot, so use them liberally when you are pressured. What do you think about the Mesmer? Tell me down in the comment section below. Some quick leveling tips as you are raising your illusionist to level 80. First, lean heavily into the illusion skills and trait lines. This ensures that you'll have quite a few clones and strengthen them to boot to handle anything that you may encounter during your leveling process. Second, remember that your shatter skills also do their effects near you, meaning that you don't always need to have your illusions on your kill target to have an effect. As long as you are close, you can still get that ability off. Thirdly, confusion is a great condition, especially for enemies who have a number of skills to utilize. Confusion inflicts damage over time, but deals significantly higher amounts of damage to targets when they utilize their skills, either weapons or utilities. With the diverse playstyle of the Mesmer, they can fit a number of roles in any endgame content. However, the Mesmer tends to lean heavily towards the condition damage route, given the amount of torment, confusion, amongst other things that they can inflict. This means that they can benefit heavily from the Viper trait line, the Carrion trait line, or even the Grieving stats line. Counter to that, because they can do some crazy strike damage as well, they can also be very effective with the Berserkers, the Marauders, or stat sets. If you want a simple no-brainer use for stats, you can of course choose the Celestial stat line, which is always a great choice. The Chronomancer is the Mesmer's elite specialization for the Heart of Thorns expansion. The Chronomancer can now manipulate time, changing their shatter skills slightly to offer additional effects. Mind Rack becomes Split Second, which deals their normal shatter damage, then it deals the strike damage again after a short time. Cry of Frustration becomes Rewinder, that confuses enemies like normal, but then recharges the skill for each clone shatter. Time Sync replaces Diversion by dazing enemies and then applying the slow condition. Distortion stays the same. Unique to the Chronomancer, they also get the shatter skill Continuum Split, which shatters clones and then allows the Chronomancer to revert back to the starting point with with the health, endurance, and skill recharge that they had before using Continuum Split. This means that they can utilize all of their skills and abilities within that window and then revert back to where they were just moments before and use all of those skills and abilities again. The Chronomancer also gains access to well abilities, which offer some great area of effects, both offensive and defensive. Each of the wells have an initial effect followed by an after effect when they expire. The Chronomancer then gains access to the shield weapon, which can block attacks, and if it successfully blocks an attack, it can use that ability again and block more attacks. The shield also can stun enemies in a wave, and then when the wave returns, it could stun them again. This mage is always on time. The Mirage is the elite specialization for the Path of Fire expansion. The Mirage foregoes the extra shadow effects to become an incredibly elusive duelist. Their dodge roll now becomes Mirage Cloak, which evades all attacks for a time like normal, but allows the Mirage to continue their skill usage, unlike the dodge roll ability. The Mirage Cloak also gains access to ambush skills, which have additional effects and damage whilst also still evading. This ability can only be used when the Mirage Cloak is active. The Mirage Cloak ability pairs incredibly well with the new skills that the Mirage has access to, which is deceptions. The deception skills have two effects. Typically, they are movement oriented, allowing the Mirage to move, shadow step, and break targeting on enemies. Shortly after the use of those skills, the Mirage can gather the Mirage mirrors, which appear directly where that skill was utilized, which grants the Mirage Cloak ability for a short time without using any of the endurance. The Mirage picks up the Axe, which can shadow step, dash, and slice enemies to bits, inflicting a number of heavy conditions. Seriously, are you sure that you saw this illusion? The Virtuoso is the End of Dragon's elite specialization for the Mesmer, and it completely removes the clone system in favor of Mind Blades, which float just above the Virtuoso. These can be utilized as an ammo system for their shatters, which becomes incredibly range-oriented. Mind Rack becomes Blade Song Harmony, which throws all stocked blades at the target, dealing immediate damage. Cry of Frustration becomes Blade Song Sorrow, that fires all stock blades, inflicting a number of conditions on the enemies. Diversion becomes Blade Song Dissonance, which combines all of your blades into a single large sword that dazes targets that are hit. Distortion becomes Blade Song Distortion, which consumes all stock blades to grant invulnerability. The Virtuoso also gains access to a new shatter skill called Blade Turn Requiem. This consumes blades to block attacks whilst spinning those blades around you, dealing damage to nearby enemies. The Virtuoso's new skills are psionic skills that add control, damage, and of course stock new blades for their use in their shatter skills. Lastly, the Virtuoso gains access to the Dagger main hand that slices enemies and gains a new blade stack as their skills are being utilized. This is the true Mind Blade. Overall, the Mesmer is an incredibly diverse caster, adept at controlling, confusing, and decimate enemies, leaving them wondering what the heck just hit them. Given its great ability to dance in and around combat, a Mesmer always puts on a show.